Hey friends, welcome back to the cabin, and today we're canning ground beef. What I've got here is about 6 pounds of ground chuck, and this is from a side of beef that we purchased not too long ago. So what I've done is I have pre-cooked it just to the point that there's no longer any pink in it. So that's ready to go into the jars. I'm going to be canning in pint jars today because that's going to be the size that's convenient for my husband and I if we want to fix a quick meal. Back here in this pot, I have 8 cups of hot water with 4 teaspoons of the beef Better Than Bouillon broth mix. And I like the Better Than Bouillon. That's my go-to brand for that. And this one also, the one that I have now, is also organic, which is just a plus. Now, the jar instructions actually say a teaspoon per cup, which would have been 8 teaspoons. But I don't want the broth to overpower the ground beef, so I cut that in half. And I've also got my All-American canner going here. It's hot. It's got 9 hot jars in there. And the way that I do my jars in here is I put about a quart to a quart and a half of water in the canner. Then I fill each of the jars halfway up, and as I use the jar, I will dump the water back into the canner until I have 3 quarts of water in the canner. So we've got the canner ready, we've got our hamburger already cooked to the point that I want it to be cooked, I've got my broth ready, but I need to bring you down where you can see what's going on. So I'll be back in just a sec and we'll get started. Okay, I want to show you something real quick. Here's my setup, but I want to show you what I have in here. These are Harvest Guard lids. They have the removable rubber gasket. These are actually reusable lids. Now I've got them in this because I'm going to pour boiling water over these two. I'm only doing 2 today, 2 jars with the Harvest Guard lids, but I'm going to pour boiling water over these, allow them to sit for 3 or 4 minutes, and that's going to make that rubber gasket very soft and pliable, so it will help it to create a really good seal on our jars. I absolutely love these lids, but there is a learning curve with them. So if you're not familiar with them, you will probably want to either just jar up some water when you have your canner going, or just limit it to 1 or 2 of your jars. So if you do have a fail, you can stick those in the refrigerator and you don't have a totally lost canner full of food. Now I'm going to get my jars out one at a time, pour the hot water back in my canner, and let's get those jars filled. Okay, and you want a good 1 inch of headspace with your liquid. You can see that this hamburger is cooked pretty well, but it's not overly done. But the pink is gone. Whoops, and I'm making a mess. I think that's about where I want to stop. Let's get our broth in here, and we're going to debubble. This is a very important step. You don't want to forget this because you don't want air pockets in there. You want liquid all the way throughout. That way you know that the temperature in the canner, when it reaches inside the jar, it's going to be uniform. With an air pocket there, it may not reach the highest temperature that it should be in that air pocket area. So it's very important that we get the air out. Now when you twist that on, as soon as you get resistance, then you want 3-finger tight. You don't want to crank down. One of the visible signs that you have cranked down, put your lid on too tight, is the top of the lid will buckle. Letting this drain good. Especially with the Harvest Guard lids, I want to get as much of the fatty liquid, and you can actually run this through a colander and strain it or drain it or some sort of way like that. But I figured with the slotted spoon, if I hold it up and just drain it good that way, I believe we're going to be okay. Okay, so we still need that 1-inch headspace, and by the way, that is even more important with the Harvest Guard lids. You don't want to go over, or less than, I should say, 1-inch headspace. So let's get our broth. Ooh. Well, let me see. That's just about perfect, but let's debubble. I think that is wonderful. That's just where we want to be. All right, so another thing that is very important with the Harvest Guard lid is you want to make sure this rim is clean. And there's several reasons why we're doing this. One of them is we don't want any salt or particles on there which can ruin a seal. And also we're checking that rim of the jar again for any nicks or cracks, or I tell you what I have had fails with is a dip in the top of the rim where it was a flaw from the manufacturer. It wasn't perfectly flat, and that's where I've had more fails than anything. So, and I just didn't catch them. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my tongs to get these out, and you see that I've already got my gasket on there. That's the gasket and the lid, and these are a BPA-free plastic lid. All right, so we're going to center that on there. We're going to start this just barely until we reach resistance, and I mean just barely. I'm trying to do this where the camera can see it. I'm going to hold my finger here with just a minimal amount of pressure, and I'm only going to tighten until the jar turns. And that is counter to what we do with the metal lids. You want to feel a little more pressure with the metal lids, but not with these Harvest Guard reusable lids. So we're going to get this one in there. And I'm going to go ahead and finish filling my jars, and I'll bring you back when I get ready to put the lid on the canner. Okay, so I ended up with 9 pints, 7 pints with the metal flat lids, and 2 with the Harvest Guard lids, so we're going to see how they do. And also, I wanted to talk to you just a second about some of the safety features that you need to be looking for. You need to make sure that your vent pipe is clear, and you also need to make sure that you have a properly working pressure gauge on your lid. And another thing that I do, well, All American Canner actually does instruct you to do this, is I will lubricate the edge of this lid with, I use coconut oil. You can use coconut oil, lard, olive oil, or just an oil of your choice, but that just helps to get a good seal when we put the lid on. I'm going to go ahead and line my lid up, the arrow on my lid, with this mark right there. So let's see if we can get that on there and get it lined up perfectly. There we go. All right. Now what I want, this is something that I stress with these All American canners, is I want this lid to be level as possible, which means the gap all the way around should be about the same. So what we're going to do to achieve that is we're going to use our toggles from side to side. We're not going to just start on one side and start tightening them down. We're going to, what I like to do is just pick 2. And I will go ahead and look. That looks pretty good right there. This one can come down just a tad, and you see when I raised that toggle it went down just a little bit. These right here, and I'm not tightening them yet. We'll go back and do that in just a second. This one can come down some. This one actually looks pretty good. Actually, they're starting to kind of level themselves out pretty good. Okay, I think I might want to tighten this one right here just a tad bit more. Yes, to help kind of get it all. Now, once I've got them kind of where I want them to be, then I'll go back, and they're going to be hot because they've been up against the side of the canner, and give them a good snug down like that, okay? So now what we're doing, is and experienced canners, you know this, but I'm just wanting to cover the bases so that if you're new to canning, try not to leave anything out, okay? So what we're gonna do now is we're gonna start watching the steam coming out of this vent pipe, and when we get a very forceful steam, then we're gonna start timing for 10 minutes. And the reason we're doing that is we're forcing air out of the canner, filling it with steam, and that's what causes the proper vacuum type pressure canning that we're doing with meat. And also, while I'm waiting on that steam to start building, let's talk a little bit about pressure canning versus water bath canning, and I'll link to that video. I'll go ahead and link to it here and put it at the end of the video where I kind of talk about that a little bit more in depth. But low acid foods must be pressure canned. That is what meat is, a low acid food. High acid foods are going to be your fruits, tomatoes, and tomatoes even are a little iffy now because the way that they're grown and the type of soil they're grown in, but we usually add citric acid or lemon juice to up that. So tomatoes, your fruits, pickles, anything with vinegar, any of your preserves that have sugar, those are fine to be done in a water bath canner. But anything low acid, and that's going to be most of your vegetables like green beans, your peas and beans, and things like that, and of course your meats, those have to be pressure canned to be safe. And the reason is at 10 pounds of pressure at my elevation, which is below 1,000 foot, which is below 1,000 feet above sea level. That's a mouthful. So I pressure can at 10 pounds of pressure. Now, if you're over 1,000 feet above sea level, then of course refer to your either to a good canning book like the Ball books, or even your canner manufacturer manual. That's going to tell you those things in there, but you're probably going to can at 15 pounds of pressure. And the reason that we have to do that is because we need to raise the temperature of the meat or the vegetables to 240 degrees to be sure that we are killing the pathogens that can make us sick. And you also need to make sure that you do it for that certain length of time for each recipe, each trusted recipe. Make sure that it's one that you trust, because it's been tested, and you'll know that it's gotten deep into those fibers or the tissue and it's had time to kill those pathogens, okay? You see that we've got a good forceful steam coming out right there. That's perfect. So what we're going to do is we're going to time 10 minutes to allow this steam to push all of the air out. Now that is a very important step. Don't skip it. So we're going to let it vent for 10 minutes, and I'll be back with you in just a bit and carry you through the next step. The canner has been venting very forcefully for 10 minutes. Now I'm going to go ahead and put my weight on. Now it's 10 pounds for my elevation. If you're 1,000 feet above sea level or more, refer to your owner's manual for your canner, but for me it's 10 pounds. So what I do, because the steam is hot, I will actually reach to the side and not try to go over it to put that on, because the steam can burn you, of course. So now what we're going to do is we're going to wait for the canner to come up to pressure. Mine runs about 10.5 to 11 pounds before I get I used to call it the jiggle, but I like the word dance better to talk about my weight moving around and releasing pressure. So once it reaches that point and we've got our 10 pounds of pressure, then we'll start timing our canning process. And for pints, for the ground beef, it's going to be 75 minutes. And so when we get to that point, then I will set my flames so that I get a dance and a pause, then a dance and a pause. I don't want a continuous jiggling, there I said it, with the weight, because that means that it's trying too hard to keep the pressure regulated. So we want a dance and a pause, a dance and a pause. And once I get that set like I like it, then I'll have time to go outside and do my chores and do my milking and get back in and take care of all of that before the 75 minutes is up. We're actually at 5 pounds of pressure, so we don't have very far to go. So I'll be back with you in just a bit when we get to that 10 pounds. Okay, I'm not sure that you can read the gauge, but it's showing 10 pounds or just a little over 10 pounds. And there it goes. There we are. We're at our jiggle. So dance. I want to start calling it dance. For some reason, when I say jiggle, I think of Jell-O. But now you see how it's doing it continuous. So I'm going to turn my flame down just a little bit and try to regulate it. See if I can get that perfect pause and dance going on. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to let the canning process go and do its thing. I'm going to go outside actually and get my milking done and the chores, and I'll be back in a little bit, and I'll be back with you when it's time for us to turn the canner off and go through those next steps. Well, it's been 75 minutes. The timer just went off, so what I'm going to do now is turn the flame off out from under my canner and just allow it to rest quietly, not do anything to it at all, allow the pressure to drop completely on its own. So I'll be back with you in a bit and I'll show you the next steps, and also a very important step that we're going to do with those Harvest Guard lids. Okay, so I actually waited for my gauge to go to 0 and then about another 5 or 6 minutes, and that's where we are now. So I'm going to reach over, and the weight is hot, so I'm going to use a pot holder and take my weight off, and then I'm going to loosen the toggles here, and I'm going to show you how I'm going to take another step to allow the canner to kind of adjust with the air temperature in the room. And just like we put our toggles on, we want to take them off the same way. We're going to work opposite sides. And they're a little bit warm. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually just raise the lid and set it up on its locks right there. You can see, and that's going to allow the room air to actually pass in and out and just help equalize the temperature and the pressure even more. So I'm going to give that about another 5 or 6 minutes, and then we'll take the lid off. And the first jars I'm going to pull out are the Harvest Guard lids, because there's a very special step that we have to do as soon as they come out of the canner. So I'll be back with you in just a bit. Okay, it's been about 5 minutes since I raised the lid up to allow the air to move back and forth, and I'm going to go ahead and take it off away from my face because it's still very hot in there. We don't want the steam to burn us. Okay, the first 2 jars that I'm going to take out is going to be the Harvest Guard, because there's a technique that we have to do as soon as we take them out. What we're going to do is we're going to really, really firmly turn that ring down on the Harvest Guard lids, and we're going to leave them undisturbed like that for 24 hours. But I'm going to take one out and show you what I'm talking about. So what we're going to do, and it's very, very hot, but we're going to put a firm grip on these lids. I'm going to go ahead and tighten it down while it's still very hot. And that one had a pretty good amount of tightening on it. So, okay, so we're going to sit those down like that. Now I'm going to take the rest of the jars out. Isn't that beautiful? And now these rings we will not touch. We will leave these just like this. We won't tighten these. We won't take them off. Now, if you had put these lids on too tight, usually around the edge somewhere, it will buckle. It will have a V shape pointing up, and that's because the air that the canner was trying to force out of the jar didn't have a way to get out, so it had to force its way out by bending the lid. So if you see that on your jars, you know that you're tightening them too tight. Finger tight with the metal flats, and just barely tight to where the jar will spin under your finger when you tighten the Harvest Guard lids before they go in the canner. Okay, that is 9 jars of beautiful ground beef. I'm going to let these rest for 24 hours. Then I will clean the jars of any residue. But as I look over in the canner, the water is clear. So everything went exactly as it should have gone. So I'm very, very pleased with that. So I'll be back with you in just a second with some beautiful words. Well, I've kind of been in a little bit of a prepper mentality the last probably 6 or 8 months, which we always try to stay a little bit prepared, and that's a good thing to do for something unexpected. But I've had this little bit more of an urgency here in the last few months. So I've kind of ramped up my canning, doing a little bit more, and I really enjoy canning, so that's not a problem at all. But with the side of beef in the freezer, I really wanted to have more canned beef and pork on the pantry shelf just in case something happened and we lost electricity. So I hope you enjoyed this as much as I did, and I hope that you got some value out of this. And we love feedback here at the cabin, so I welcome comments, questions. If you have some tips, that would be great. But you know that I want to share some beautiful words with you. Don't ever forget that your Heavenly Father loves you. And we'll see you on the next video. God bless.